Max Greb, better known as Max the Meat Guy, wasn't always the perfectly marbled internet persona he's known as today. Before the sizzling steaks and viral tomahawk cuts, he was just a guy trying to find meaning, balance, and maybe even a little peace. His rise to fame felt like something out of a movie. Raw talent, relentless hustle, and a magnetic personality that made people believe in meat like it was a religion. But behind the fire and the flash of every perfectly seared ribeye, there were stories people never really heard. Moments in silence, chapters unwritten. Friends close to him remember a shift, a quiet moment when Max stopped talking about one particular weekend trip, something about a storm, a long road, and headlights that never should have been there. A few cryptic Instagram stories from that time vanished, and when asked, he'd deflect with a joke or a smirk. There's no confirmed detail, no statement, but those who knew him before say something in him changed. Maybe it was the realization that life is brutally short, like a steak left on the fire too long. Or maybe it was the weight of a memory too heavy to carry openly. Whatever it was, it fueled something in him. He cooked harder, lived louder, smiled wider. And maybe that's why millions connected with him. Max didn't just make food, he made people feel. Every slice, every seasoning, every shot had this invisible emotion, like he was fighting something unseen. You could sense it in the stillness between his words, in the crackle of the fire, in the glint of his eye when the camera turned off. There was more to the meat guy than meat, and that's where the real story begins. As Max's online fame began to explode, it seemed like nothing could stop his momentum. His Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube channels were on fire. Millions tuning in to watch him age beef with science lab precision and carve it up with surgeon-like skill. But what fans saw was only the surface, a carefully trimmed and seasoned version of a much deeper story. The long hours in front of a grill were a distraction, a way to drown out the inner noise. Behind the lens, there were sleepless nights editing content until dawn, phone calls that went unanswered, and messages he'd type and delete again and again. Some friends noticed he became more isolated, retreating from gatherings, skipping holidays, always too busy with work. But it wasn't about the work, it was about staying ahead of the silence. He once said in a live stream, almost offhandedly, "You gotta keep moving or the heat catches up to you." And fans laughed, thinking it was about steak. But those close to him knew it was something else entirely. Fame can be a heavy thing when it arrives quickly, like a steak you didn't expect to flip so soon, and Max was carrying it with a smile that never quite reached his eyes anymore. There was also the pressure of perfection, the expectation that every new post be more epic than the last. That pressure would wear anyone down, but Max bore it with grit. Still, something in his content began to change. It became moodier, darker even. The music more ambient, the cuts sharper, the voiceovers slower and more contemplative. He started talking about savoring every second and not wasting the good parts. No one asked what that meant. They just liked and scrolled. But the few who truly listened realized Max wasn't just cooking anymore. He was communicating, quietly crying out through the only medium he trusted: fire, meat, and silence. Max's background wasn't forged in a butcher shop or culinary academy. It was shaped by something far more chaotic, a cocktail of ambition, pain, and a need to prove himself in a world that rarely offered second chances. Long before the world saw him as a meat-slicing virtuoso, Max had been chasing dreams in different directions: fitness, photography, even digital marketing. But nothing stuck. People close to him say he was always searching, always running towards something, but never really sure what it was. Then, almost overnight, he stumbled onto meat, not just cooking it, but understanding it, respecting it, turning it into art. It was as if he found purpose in the primal, a clarity in the carnivorous, the sound of sizzling fat, the control of the blade. The moment when heat kissed flesh just right. This wasn't just food. It was therapy. It gave him something solid to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping through his fingers. But what no one realized was how deep that need ran. Behind the smoke and smiles was someone desperately trying to stay grounded. Someone who'd been knocked around by life in ways no one had fully pieced together. There were whispers among collaborators about Max disappearing for days, about late-night texts that didn't make sense, about a restlessness that never seemed to ease. He was always on, always performing, but even his most loyal fans noticed the cracks. There were fewer collaborations, more solo videos. He stopped showing his face as much. Some said it was artistic choice. Others sensed burnout. But those who had seen Max's fire in the early days knew this wasn't just about aesthetics. Something inside him had shifted, and every new video seemed like a plea to be understood, to be seen, to be more than just a guy who cuts meat. The tragedy wasn't loud. It was slow, subtle, and already seeping into everything he touched. As the months passed, Max began leaning harder into the craft, dry aging meat for months, experimenting with techniques that blurred the line between obsession and genius. He wasn't chasing clout anymore. He was chasing control. Each steak became more than food. It was a canvas, a confession, a cry for stillness in a life spiraling out of sync. Fans admired the intensity, the cinematic flair of his slow-motion slicing, the whisper of his voice over ambient music as he muttered phrases like, "Perfect doesn't exist, but I'll get close." But behind the beautifully aged cuts and slow pans was a man aging faster than he let on, burdened by something he never named. He rarely posted personal photos anymore. No more behind-the-scenes laughs or shared meals with friends. When a longtime collaborator quietly exited the scene, fans noticed but didn't question it. People come and go in content creation. But in Max's case, the departures felt more like disappearances. He stopped traveling as much, citing work. Yet some noticed the same apartment background over and over. The same lighting, the same silence. Comments occasionally asked if he was okay, to which he'd reply with a thumbs-up emoji or a steak gif, turning worry into performance. In one video, he simply stared at the grill for 20 full seconds before speaking, an uncharacteristic pause that left fans unsettled, though they couldn't say why. "This one's for those who feel too much," he finally whispered, before searing a thick cut of Wagyu. It got millions of views, but no one really asked what he meant. Max had become fluent in emotional misdirection, expressing everything through temperature, texture, and timing. And as his videos grew quieter, more poetic, the noise in his life seemed to swell off-screen. Fame had brought success, yes, but also isolation, a cage lined with applause, and in that silence, surrounded by fire and flesh, Max the Meat Guy was slowly disappearing, one beautiful cut at a time. Somewhere along the way, the fire that once fueled Max began to burn him instead. The same rituals that had once given him structure, sharpening knives, seasoning cuts, calibrating temperatures, became compulsions. His videos turned more minimalist, more intimate. He'd often cook in silence now, or overlay soft, brooding piano music instead of his usual upbeat tracks. The camera lingered longer on his hands, his cuts more deliberate, almost meditative. His captions grew cryptic, filled with abstract quotes like, "Not everything tenderizes with time," or "What's rare isn't always valuable." Fans praised the poetic shift, but others whispered that he was slipping away from them. Some even speculated burnout, depression, or worse, though Max never addressed any of it directly. Instead, he doubled down on the work. He'd spend days marinating one piece of meat just to get a single shot. Perfection, or at least the illusion of it, became a shield. In interviews, he was careful, rehearsed, smiling, nodding, thanking the algorithms, the fans, the process. But the real Max? The one who used to laugh with a mouthful of steak grease and share awkward, charming moments in blooper reels? He was nowhere to be found. And while the world admired the artistry, those closest to him began expressing concern. He stopped returning texts, canceled meetups last minute, and slowly withdrew from public appearances altogether. There was no scandal, no incident, just a slow fading, like smoke curling up from a dying flame. Even in this withdrawal, he kept posting, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only place he still felt safe. The grill became his confessional, the sizzle his voice, the edits his armor. He didn't need to explain himself, he just needed to keep the fire going. Because stopping, even for a moment, might mean confronting whatever he'd been running from all along. And that, more than anything, terrified him. It wasn't until one of Max's most devoted fans posted a side-by-side comparison of his earliest and most recent videos that the full extent of the transformation became impossible to ignore. The change was staggering. The Max from the early days had this wild, unfiltered energy, messy aprons, loud laughs, bursts of joy between bites. But in his recent uploads, that fire seemed tempered, quieted. His apron was clean, his movements exact. It was as if Max had traded chaos for control, but not because he wanted to, because he had to. Fans noticed he had lost weight, his voice had grown softer, and his signature grin had faded into a subtle, polite nod. One commenter wrote, "It's like he's still here, but he's not. His food is better than ever, but something feels..." And that word, hollow, followed him, echoing through Reddit threads, private Discord chats, and even DM groups formed by fans desperate to know what had changed. But Max never addressed it, not publicly. The only clues came from the tiniest of details. The empty whiskey glass, always sitting just out of frame. The rare moment when his hand trembled slightly while slicing through a porterhouse. The occasional far-off look when the grill hissed too loud. Even his dogs, once regular guests in his videos, stopped appearing. In their place were longer, colder shots of meat alone on a cutting board. No music, no voice, just the sound of the flame and the knife. And still, Max posted, relentlessly. It was almost as if he feared stopping more than burning out, because when he stopped, the silence wasn't just quiet. He once captioned a post with, "Some meat falls apart if you handle it too much." Some people too. Fans thought it was a metaphor. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the closest he'd ever come to asking for help. Masked, like always, in meat. By now, even casual followers were beginning to sense that something was deeply off. Max's uploads had grown inconsistent. Some weeks, he'd post twice a day with fanfare and finesse. Other times he'd vanish for 10, 12, even 15 days without a word. When he returned, the videos felt different, like they weren't made for the audience anymore. They were for him. Gone were the hashtags, the engaging thumbnails, the polished captions. Instead, he'd post raw clips of meat cooking in silence. No music, no commentary, just the lonely hiss of fat melting on cast iron. Some thought it was performance art, an evolution in his brand. But others saw what it really was, a man retreating into ritual. The platform that once launched his name into the digital stratosphere now felt like the only place he could speak without being spoken to. His DMs reportedly went unopened for months. A friend tried reaching him through a mutual collaborator, only to be told Max had gone dark. Another said he'd returned a call but spoke in vague riddles, as if unsure whether he was speaking to a person or a memory. Rumors of a personal loss, unconfirmed and whispered, began surfacing in online forums. Fans theorized everything from family estrangement to a tragic breakup to residual trauma from that one offhanded mention of a road trip gone wrong. But Max never confirmed or denied anything. Instead, his work became his language. In one particularly haunting video, he cooked a steak completely through. No reverse sear, no temperature checks, just fire until the meat was gray, and lifeless. He said nothing, but in the caption he wrote, "Still served it." The video went viral, but not because of the steak, because of what it said without saying. That's how Max spoke now. Not in words, but in heat and smoke. And the silence was starting to feel endless. At a certain point, Max's silence became louder than anything he'd ever said. His channel, once a vibrant celebration of craft and creativity, began to resemble a diary written in flame and fat. Fans started revisiting old videos, trying to trace the exact moment everything changed, combing through frame by frame for a missed glance, a sigh, a detail lost in the smoke. And there were signs, subtle but consistent. A photo of a cracked windshield, barely visible in the reflection of his knife. A somber tone in a video titled, "Cuts That Heal." The way he started signing off with nothing. No "thanks for watching," no outro, just the sizzle fading into black. It became clear that Max wasn't building a brand anymore. He was building a wall, one stake at a time. He'd found refuge in routine, comfort in control, and if you looked closely, pain in perfection. He still cooked with passion, but it was different now. There was no joy in the flame, only necessity. It was survival, disguised as art. In one live stream, rare and glitchy, someone asked him why he never showed his face anymore. He paused, stared directly into the lens, then said, "Because it's not the part that matters." Then he ended the stream. People speculated, argued, speculated more. Was it burnout? Trauma? Grief? But all anyone really knew was that Max was fading. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted to. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Because being seen meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant risking collapse. So instead, he chose the flame. Every slice of brisket, every reverse-seared ribeye, every bone marrow torch session became a coded message, a memory cooked medium rare and served to the masses. And we devoured it, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to accept, that this wasn't content. This was confession. Max the meat guy wasn't trying to impress us anymore. He was trying to be heard, even if all he had left was smoke. Eventually, it felt like Max wasn't cooking for views or virality anymore. He was cooking to remember. But no one knew what or who he was trying to remember. There was a stretch of videos that fans began calling the morning series, a silent sequence of meals cooked at night, always alone, always in near darkness. No captions, no voiceovers, just Max, lit only by the glow of fire or the soft hum of a refrigerator light. One video showed him slicing into a roast with trembling hands, blood pooling on the board like something sacred. Another ended with him simply sitting beside the finished dish. It felt like grief, but grief for what? He never explained. And maybe he couldn't. Maybe he feared that naming it would make it real. The fans tried to fill in the blanks. Some pointed to a long-forgotten tweet where Max cryptically wrote, "What do you do when the person you cooked for is gone?" Others dug up fragments. An old podcast interview where he mentioned someone who believed in him before the meat. But no names, no faces. The man who once shared everything through the lens of community had become a ghost in his own kitchen. And still, the uploads trickled in, like messages in a bottle from a man stranded inside his own mind. One fan messaged him, saying, "You don't owe us content, you owe yourself peace." He never replied, but a week later he posted a video titled, "Quiet Isn't Quitting." It featured no meat, just an empty grill, smoke rising, then fading. Some said it was his goodbye. Others believed it was a reset, but whatever it was raw. Max had become more than a meat guy. He had become a symbol of perseverance, of silence, of the way pain can hide in plain sight when disguised as passion. The heartbreak wasn't in what he lost. It was in what he carried, quietly, alone, while the rest of us kept asking for another bite. And now, when we look back at the journey of Max the Meat Guy, it doesn't feel like the rise and fall of an influencer. It feels like the quiet unraveling of a man who gave the world everything except his own voice. He became famous for meat, but behind every steak was a piece of himself carved away, until there wasn't much left to give. He fed millions, not just with food, but with consistency, comfort, and the illusion of control. But the tragedy is that we never really saw him. We saw the hands, the flames, the plates. We heard the sizzle, the soft narration, the reverence for the craft. But we missed the exhaustion, the grief. All along, Max wasn't just feeding us. He was begging us to notice something he couldn't say. Maybe it was the loss of someone close. Maybe it was trauma buried so deep it could only surface through the heat of a sear. Maybe it was simply the weight of being everything to everyone, every day, without a break. We'll never fully know, because Max never stopped long enough to explain, and we never paused long enough to ask. What we do know is that his work left a mark far deeper than anyone expected. It taught people to slow down, to honor process, to find meaning in the mundane. But it also taught us how easy it is to miss the pain behind excellence, the sorrow hiding in obsession. As of now, Max's channel remains. Videos still there, still beautiful, still heartbreaking in retrospect. And whether he returns or not almost doesn't matter, because his silence said more than any final post could. The knives are still sharp, the fire still waits, but the man behind it, maybe he's somewhere quiet now, finally resting, or maybe he's still out there, slicing through the silence, one cut at a time, hoping someone finally hears the message he spent years trying to cook into every single plate.